Every year, gardeners spend money on the same blue box, mix it into water, and feed it to plants that are already surrounded by free fertilizer they spend half their weekend pulling out of the ground and throwing away. Weeds. The exact thing you've been fighting all summer is one of the richest sources of plant nutrients sitting in your yard, and it costs nothing but the time it takes to pull them. Here's what Miracle-Gro actually is, printed right on the box if you flip it over. A synthetic blend, 24% nitrogen, 8% phosphorus, 16% potassium, built from urea, ammonium salts, and potassium chloride. It's designed to be measured, mixed, and reapplied every 7 to 14 days for as long as your plants are growing. That's not a criticism of the science. It works in the narrow sense that it feeds the plant directly, but it also means that you're locked into buying it again and again for every growing season you ever have, because it does nothing to build the soil itself. It just feeds whatever's already there. Here's what almost nobody explains about the weeds you're pulling. Weeds are aggressive, deep-rooted plants that are extremely good at one specific job, mining nutrients out of soil that other plants can't reach. Dandelions send taproots down over a foot, pulling up nitrogen and potassium from deep layers most vegetable roots never touch. Nettles concentrate nitrogen in their leaves at levels most garden plants would consider a feast. Comfrey, if you have it or can get some, is famous among old-school gardeners, specifically because its roots dig down several feet and haul up potassium other plants left behind. Not every weed belongs in the bucket, though. Skip anything that's already gone to seed, since dropping seed heads into a fermenting tea is a fast way to plant a whole new crop of weeds directly into your garden beds. Skip anything visibly diseased, too, moldy, spotted, or rotting at the base, since fermentation doesn't reliably kill off plant pathogens the way a hot compost pile does. And if you're using nettles, wear gloves while collecting them. The sting doesn't survive the water, but your hands will thank you during the harvest. Beyond that, almost anything green and actively growing in your yard is fair game for the bucket. Every time you pull a weed and throw it in the yard waste bin, you're throwing away nutrients your vegetables would have happily used. The trick isn't getting rid of that material, it's putting it back to work in liquid form. Grab a bucket and go collect weeds. The more variety the better, since different weeds pull up different nutrients. Dandelions, nettles, comfrey if you can find it, even ordinary lawn weeds all work. Tear them up loosely as you go, roots, soil, and all. It doesn't need to be clean. Pack the bucket about 2/3 full, then cover everything with water. Rainwater if you have it, tap water if you don't. Cover the bucket loosely, not sealed, because the mixture ferments as it breaks down and needs somewhere for gas to escape. Seal it tight, and you risk it building enough pressure to actually burst. Leave it in a shady spot for about 2 weeks. It will smell genuinely bad by the end. That's fermentation doing its job, breaking the plant material down and releasing its nutrients into the water around it. If the smell gets overwhelming before the 2 weeks are up, that's not a sign of failure. It just means it's fermenting faster in warmer weather. You can strain it and start using it early, at a slightly weaker dilution, rather than waiting the full 2 weeks in the height of summer heat. If it grows a layer of white film or foam on top, skim it off before straining. It's harmless, just a natural part of the fermentation process, not mold ruining the batch. Once it's ready, it's strong enough that using it undiluted can actually stress your plants rather than help them. Mix it roughly 1 part weed tea to 10 parts water, about the color of weak tea itself, and water it directly into the soil around whatever you're growing. Use it every 2 to 4 weeks during the growing season, and keep the original bucket going by topping it up with more water and more weeds as you use it down, so one batch can keep feeding your garden for months instead of one application. This isn't some new internet trick either. Long before synthetic fertilizer existed, gardeners in cottage gardens and early allotments were already steeping nettles and comfrey in barrels of water for exactly this reason, out of necessity rather than any particular philosophy. Comfrey especially earned a reputation among generations of gardeners specifically for this. Deep tap roots that pull potassium up from soil layers nothing else reaches, concentrated into leaves that break down into liquid feed almost effortlessly. It's one of the reasons old kitchen gardens often kept a patch of comfrey growing along the fence on purpose, not for eating, but purely to keep the feed bucket full through the season. Synthetic fertilizer didn't improve on that idea so much as it replaced the labor of brewing it yourself with the convenience of a box you can buy on the way home. The plants can't tell the difference. The only real difference is what happens to the $20 or $30 you would have spent buying it instead. Here's the part worth saying plainly because plenty of gardening advice oversells this. Weed tea isn't a precisely balanced fertilizer the way Miracle-Gro is measured to be. Depending on what weeds you used, it tends to run higher in potassium than nitrogen or phosphorus, which makes it especially good for flowering and fruiting plants, tomatoes, peppers, squash, roses, anything putting energy into blooms and fruit rather than just leaves. It's not going to outperform a lab-formulated fertilizer gram for gram on paper. What it does do is feed your plants using nutrients your own yard already produced at zero cost, while also improving the soil around the roots instead of just feeding what's already growing in it. Miracle-Gro treats the symptom. Weed tea treats the ground underneath it too, slowly, the way compost does, just faster. If one bucket isn't enough once you see how well it works, this scales easily. Some gardeners keep 2 or 3 buckets going at different stages, one freshly filled, one actively fermenting, one ready to use, so there's always a batch on hand instead of waiting 2 weeks between refills. Larger gardens sometimes move up to a covered trash can instead of a bucket, using the same ratio of weeds to water, just at a bigger volume. The process doesn't change, only the scale does. And because the raw material is free and constantly renewing itself in your own yard, there's no real ceiling on how much of this you can produce, unlike a fertilizer budget that only stretches as far as what you're willing to keep spending. Do the math over a full season and the gap is hard to ignore. A single box of Miracle-Gro plant food runs somewhere around $30, and most gardeners go through several of those across spring and summer alone, feeding every 7 to 14 days for months. Weed tea costs whatever a 5-gallon bucket already sitting in your garage is worth, and the weeds themselves are something you're already removing from your yard, regardless of what you do with them afterward. Over a full growing season, that's the difference between spending real money every few weeks and spending nothing at all beyond the time it takes to pull weeds you were already going to pull. One more thing worth knowing. This isn't an either-or decision if you're not ready to give up synthetic fertilizer completely. Plenty of gardeners run both side by side for a season, weed tea as the regular feed, with an occasional dose of something store-bought for plants that are clearly struggling and need a fast, measured correction. The point was never to declare Miracle-Gro useless. It's to stop treating it as the only option when there's a free one already growing along your fence line, doing nothing but waiting to be pulled. So the next time you're on your knees pulling weeds out of a flower bed, cursing at how fast they grow back, remember that the same aggressive growth making them a nuisance is exactly what makes them valuable. They're not competing with your garden for nutrients. They already pulled those nutrients out of the ground for you. All that's left to do is put them in a bucket instead of a trash bag. The neighbors spraying their lawns and refilling shopping carts with garden center bags aren't doing anything you can't do for free. They've just never been told the weeds in their own yard were the answer the whole time. So tell me, what's the most stubborn weed in your yard right now? And if you try this, what are you brewing it for? Tomatoes, roses, something else entirely? Drop it in the comments.